Okay, welcome back. We're so excited. That's great. Okay, so I now have the privilege of introducing another speaker, Mohammed Ashour, he came to Hot Chicken Takeover last night and was like instantly in a million conversations. So I know that you'll love hearing from him. He is using insects to alleviate world food insecurity. I'm just as excited as you are to figure out how he's doing that. So please help me welcome Mohammed.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to begin by sincerely thanking the organizers. I think this is an extraordinarily well-run event. The content is fantastic, and the speakers so far have been extraordinary. So really, just a huge round of applause, guys, for these organizers. And now that I've hopefully won some favor with you guys, I'm going to actually insult everybody in the audience. So this is not a joke. Yesterday, I got to my hotel, which is paid for by Ohio State University, so this is not even my choice. And as soon as I show up in the lobby, I see a massive population of University of Michigan students. So, of course, I had to do this. So with that out of the way, I'd love to tell you a little bit about my company Aspire and what it is that we do, and how I'd like to break this discussion is in three parts. So first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and sort of how I got into this opportunity of entering into social enterprise, which is a very unlikely journey. The second thing I want to do is I want to tell you a little bit about Aspire and what we're trying to do around the world, and then the last thing I'd like to do is perhaps just share some of the lessons red failures that we have learned from over the last couple of years, and then I'd like to create some time in the end to take as many questions from you guys as possible. Of course, I'll be around for lunch, so whoever wants to pull me afterwards, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. I'll begin first with one caveat, which is one of my favorite quotes, and it's a quote by George Monbiot, which is, "If wealth was the inevitable result of hard work and enterprise, every woman in Africa would be a millionaire." So I wanted to start with that because there's a misperception, especially in our society. It's called the self-attribution fallacy, where when you are successful or you obtain a major, milestone in life, etc., you tend to give a lot of credit to your hard work and your discipline and neglect the fact that there is, in addition to those things, this third, little tiny, teeny thing called luck, fortune, fate, however way you wish to define it and label it in your life and in your worldview, that plays a major role. So I think it's important, especially with a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs in this room who are going to change the world, to always have that dose of humility in the back of your mind and be very fortunate for all of the many things in life that you were not responsible for, that you had no role in defining, that have put you in a position where you can capture these extraordinary opportunities. So with that said, I actually did an undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto. I'm Canadian, so I guess that gives me some privilege here. Too early. I went to the University of Toronto, did a degree in life sciences, and then I went to McGill University to do a master's degree in neuroscience. I actually wanted to be a neurosurgeon growing up, for no particular reason. None of my parents are physicians, but I did grow up to two Egyptian immigrant parents where you're either doctor, lawyer, or engineer, and that's where life should take you. So of all those many options, doctor was the one that resonated with me the most. And frankly, for the many reasons a lot of people are attracted to medicine. You want to serve your community, you want to do something intellectually very stimulating, and on top of all, of course, you want to be able to make a decent living for yourself and family. Decent might be an understatement. Some doctors are really overpaid. So after I did my master's degree in neuroscience, I was going to apply to medical school, but I had a year gap. And in that time, I decided I'm going to apply to schools. And I graduated now armed with 2 degrees from 2 of the top schools in the country, so job offers are going to pop out of my ears. Well, no, nobody cared at all. It was a very humbling experience that got me to really cast as wide a net as possible and ultimately landed me at a startup in Waterloo, Ontario, doing sales for a company that did an educational software app. So not exactly synaptogenesis in the early mammalian developing brain, but close. So that was an extraordinary experience because on top of the fact that I didn't grow up with any entrepreneurs in my family, I actually grew up with a bias against business, a bias where I felt that business historically, and it's not necessarily an inaccurate or a mythological bias, it's in many cases understandable and even justified, that much business around the world has, while it created opportunities, jobs, prosperity for some folks, it also created a lot of destruction and a lot of exploitation. So it didn't really appeal to me very much growing up. When I came to this startup, I was really just blown away by the fact that at your very fingertips, you can have a tremendous impact every single day. And the CEO of the company is sitting right there, and you're talking and discussing new ideas and new ways that you can position a product to truly make it better for students to be engaged in the classroom, et cetera. And that maybe 8-month period I spent there was so extraordinary in terms of and how eye-opening it was and how much it changed my paradigm about business, that when I applied to medicine at McGill University, I actually applied for the joint MD-MBA program because I really felt that I wanted to strengthen my understanding of business and ultimately use it to the benefit of patients and healthcare, and et cetera. So when I got into the program, this was in summer of 2012 when we started. The program was 5 years. The first year was the MBA and then 4 years of medicine. When I started my MBA, 2 months in, I got an email from a friend saying, "Hey, Mohammed, there's this competition called the Hult Prize. Check it out." So I went on the website and I checked it out, and it was pretty compelling. There's a big picture of Bill Clinton on the front page, $1 million, all these bells and whistles, so it got your attention. And I remember thinking, this is pretty cool, but what really excited me was this understanding of this concept of social enterprise, the idea that a business in its very own infrastructure can address a major global social challenge, and in fact makes money by solving that challenge, which to me was really what brought everything full circle and got me very excited. So I put together a team from my MBA. At the time, I had only known everybody in my class for like 2 months. Now, we had these resume books they gave us out, which had like everybody's resume, so it was a really cool way to stalk people without having to talk to them, and then kind of handpick the people that I thought would make a really cool complementary team. And so we put together our team, and then applied. Now, we didn't know at the time that we were one of 12,000 teams from around the world applying in 180 countries. And I'm glad we didn't, because that would have really intimidated the crap out of us. We applied, and then a few months later, we were told that we are now one of the global semifinalists. So out of the 12,000, now 250 teams made it to the semifinal round. And they were broken up into 5 pools of 50. That were going to compete in 5 different cities. So we were actually to compete in Boston amongst 50 other teams from Boston University, Harvard, MIT, et cetera, and then in these 5 different cities, only one winner to create the 5 global finalists who would then go on to New York and pitch at the Clinton Global Initiative for the grand $1 million prize. So I put together a team, and then we learned about the challenge, and the challenge was food insecurity. I'm going to have to try to stand on this side. The challenge was food insecurity in urban slums. How do you create access to healthy, affordable, and nutritious food to nearly 20 million people in a span of 10 years? It's a very significant, very ambitious target. So we started doing a lot of research, looking across the entire value chain, and there is a really interesting story I can tell you if you're interested after lunch as to how did you guys come up with the idea of insects, but I'll spare you that story for now, just so I can be respectful of my time and the time of the other speakers. So one of the things that really captivated our attention was this notion that 2 billion people in 80% of the world's countries already consume insects or have consumed it as part of their tradition. And the reason is because insects are considered very nutritious, and they are considered a very sustainable source of protein. So this blew our minds, because if this is so ubiquitous, if it is so nutritious, why isn't it everywhere? Well, we came to learn that and of course, it's important for us to contextualize this challenge. Food security is going to be the biggest problem of our generation, more problematic actually than access to energy, maybe second only to water and access to fresh water, frankly. It's so dramatic because we are experiencing major changes as a planet, which I'm sure most of you are very intimately familiar with. 9 billion people over the next 20 years at a time where we are experiencing a rapid diminishing of critical resources like land, water, energy, et cetera, and now there's a need for food solutions that somehow can feed this growing planet and sustain it, but at the same time not compound those challenges that our planet is going to face over the next little while. So we started, doing some research, and of course we talked about the fact that it's a very significant market, and it's significant, the interest in insects is significant because from a nutrition perspective they really are a superfood if you compare them to practically any other conventional form of livestock. But more impressive is that insects are actually so extraordinarily efficient to produce. So if you think of a cow, for example, when you guys, everybody here who consumes beef, most people talk about something called the feed conversion efficiency, which again, I'm sure many of the people here are familiar with that. It's just the idea of how much feed does it take to produce a pound of protein. So with cows, the number that's often quoted is that it takes 7 pounds of feed to give you 1 pound of beef. That's actually not true. It takes 7 pounds of feed to give you 1 pound of cow. But we don't eat cow. We don't eat usually the bones and all these other aspects of the cow. So if we actually normalize it to edible beef, it's 20 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of edible beef. If you think about water, it takes approximately 6,000 times more water to produce the same amount of insect protein that it would have to produce beef protein. If you think about greenhouse gas emissions, they are practically non-existent. And later on, I'll show you guys a couple of pictures of what an insect farm looks like in case you're interested. And no, they're not free range, unfortunately, for obvious reasons. When we think about, we talked about 80% of the world's countries already having an adoption of insects as part of their food paradigm, which means there's 20% of the countries that don't. Of course, the United States being one of them, although many would actually argue anthropologically that that's not accurate, that as far back as humans ever existed, insects have been part of our diet, and surely on this continent there were people thousands of years ago. But if we go with the paradigm today that we can all agree that it's not a very popular thing to eat in North America, one of the things we like to think about when we think about the consumer's psyche is, really, how do you position this food product compared to what people already consume? So when you really think about it, this is not very different than some stuff that many of us eat today. If you think about it, that's a particularly gross picture of a lobster that I picked deliberately for that reason. But if you think about it, many of you may know or not know that lobsters used to actually be considered the food of the poor. In fact, lobsters were considered so disgusting that fishermen who used to accidentally catch lobsters in their fish nets used to actually mince them and grind them and throw them as fertilizer in their fields. It was so bad that if you were a kid who went to school with a lobster sandwich, you were actually shoved in lockers. Like, it was that bad. And yet, obviously, our culture has seen a huge paradigm shift in how we perceive these still bottom feeders. I mean, lobsters haven't changed in terms of their biology. They haven't changed in terms of what they consume. The only thing that changed is our perception of them and how they were presented, marketed, and positioned. So when we first started off, we obviously wanted to not reinvent the wheel. So our insight was, what if we could come up with a way to farm insects on a year-round basis? Because we knew that the challenge was that insects were only seasonally available, and they're typically hand-harvested, which makes them very expensive to produce. So our idea was, what if we could create a modular technology where we can farm insects and make that accessible around the world? And to Dr. Gupta's point earlier today when he spoke about using the enterprise and knowledge of, people and industries that already exist instead of us having to reinvent the wheel, one of the first things we did is we actually traveled to many countries around the world, which I'll come to in a second. But first, we realized that 20 miles away from our campus in Montreal was this cricket farm in Cornwall, Ontario, that actually farmed crickets for the pet food industry. So we thought that was a good start to just go and kind of check out how they do it, what are their challenges, and what are the ways you can potentially commercially scale this process. We then went on to Boston, and we competed there, and our business model that we pitched, which ultimately led us to win the Boston regional final and then become one of the 5 global finalists, was the idea that what we are going to do is we are going to create this modular insect farming technology, and we are going to make it accessible to smallholder farmers, in addition to creating essentially almost like a cottage-type industry for insect farming around the world. But what we also pitched was that how we're going to make money isn't just by selling this technology or these devices and the upkeep. We also are going to collect the byproducts of the insects, which actually have utility and have market positioning in completely different areas. So for example, crickets produce frass, or colloquially, poop, like any other organism. And insect poop is actually an excellent source of organic fertilizer. So we then take that byproduct, and instead of throwing it out, which historically is what's done, you actually sell it to organic farmers. Secondly, and very interestingly, insects shed their exoskeleton multiple times in their lives. And the exoskeleton of insects is rich, or most insects, I should say, is rich in a biopolymer called chitin. Chitin is actually used in a ton of industries. It's a $62 billion market globally. It's used in everything from water treatment, flocculation, to giving that wax coating to your produce in the grocery store to prolong its shelf life. Even surgical sutures are actually made out of biopolymers like chitin. So then the idea was, let's take the frass and sell it as fertilizer. Let's take the chitosan and sell that as essentially a biomedical input, a raw material. And then, of course, let's sell the insects for food. So now you have 3 different revenue streams. You're monetizing the entire insect in a zero-waste way, and at the same time, you're creating jobs. So that was the pitch that ultimately led us to win in Boston. After Boston, we then traveled, from Mexico to Kenya, Ghana, and Thailand to really observe how different insects are being farmed around the world in different countries. And we knew that for us to set up our business as a bunch of Canadian students in a country that's not Canada, we have to make sure that we are selecting an insect that, number 1, is farmable, number 2, in a country where there's already an affinity for eating insects, and then finally, number 3, to make sure that, frankly, it's a country that is, shall we say, welcoming to a foreign startup to do business, which is a very important thing that you should not overlook. And we came across a lot of really interesting insights. Obviously, in Mexico, chapulines, grasshoppers, are very popular. This is a picture of us actually spending like 10 hours on the field trying to hand harvest 1 kilogram of grasshoppers. Do not try to do this. It's the worst way you can spend a day. And explains why grasshoppers are $40 per kilogram to purchase directly from a farmer. We're not talking at the retail point. We're talking directly from the farmer. More expensive than beef, chicken, and pork combined. Poor people go to farmers and literally buy 10-gram portions because of how attractive this source of protein is in the country. We obviously, continued on to, Kenya and did a really interesting pilot where we started working with smallholder farmers on how to farm crickets there, and tried to, scale that, in the few months we were there. In Thailand, we also learned about how to farm palm weevil larvae. This is a really cool example of cross-pollination. So palm weevil larvae are consumed widely throughout Africa, and specifically in places in West Africa like Ghana. The challenge is palm weevil larvae are actually, in many parts of the world, considered a pest, even in Ghana. So what happens is when a palm tree starts to basically come to the end of its life, it starts to ferment. And that's when palm weevil larvae invade and essentially start to consume the inside bark of the tree. And usually what will happen is people will cut the trees down just to extract, sap from the trees to create palm wine, but they'll also grab the insects and then use them for food. Well, we don't exactly want to give people food at the cost of deforesting the country, so we wanted to come up with a way to farm palm weevils, which was never done in Ghana and never done in Africa, but it was done in Thailand. So we actually went and learned how to do this in Thailand and then brought that to Ghana, and therefore essentially introduced the technology from Thailand to Ghana that never really existed before that point. So all of that led us ultimately to New York, which led us to pitch for the $1 million prize, and ultimately led to this gentleman here making an announcement, which I will now play.
So,
assuming the audio works.
All I have to do is announce the winner. From McGill University, Aspire. Come on up. I congratulate Mohammed Ashour, Gabriel Mott, Jesse Pearlstein, Shabita Soor, Zeb Thompson for winning. If I said to somebody 60 days ago, I love this prize and I'm going to go give the prize this year to someone who wants to grow, process, and sell edible insects, to actually empower rather than devour urban communities, some people would laugh. But the truth is, 2.5 billion people worldwide eat insects seasonally already. They're an excellent source of protein and nutrients, and they want to formalize existing informal markets. This is very innovative. Products have been made already. They want to leverage what we know already about existing foods and use it differently. They have truly thought outside the box, and they have a proper business plan to execute their strategy. And it is very specific to address food security. So this is pretty impressive. I wish them well, and I ask you to remember what our previous winner said, that we should give some help to all 6 of the finalists. Congratulations, and thank you very much.
Oh, thanks. I'll very, very quickly show you just a clip of what we're doing in Ghana, just because unfortunately I don't want to start taking over someone else's time, but this will give you some idea. Nutritious.
If you look at farming in general, you need a lot of land, water, and most of them are really labor and capital intensive. But palm leaf farming, on the other hand, is something that anybody can do.
We have, for the first time in the history of the continent of Africa, been able to introduce the farming of palm weevils in captivity to rural farmers. This has never been done before. We've operationalized all of this into a single device that you can give an illiterate farmer in rural Ghana, and they would be able, within days and minimal training, to actually start production. And we've actually done this with over 500 farmers throughout Ghana.
After the master time, maybe some man be an asset, my identity. Mayana said, a talk of movements will be some much the answer.
The youngest collaborator is a 6-year-old guy.
So I apologize, I just want to, again, be respectful of the time of other speakers, but the video goes on to basically show you that one of the really exciting things that happened is this became an extraordinary employment enterprise opportunity for seniors. So a lot of people, imagine living in a very, very small, highly condensed hut with not just your spouse, but your 4 children, and then an elderly parent of one of the 2 spouses, or even both sometimes. You know, in most of our societies here in sort of the developed part of the world, you know, when people get to a certain age, they're made to feel socially like there's not very much they can offer anymore. And even if they're not made to feel that, they typically feel that themselves. And that's a very unfortunate thing. But that's multiplied in a part of the world where the entire household is living hand to mouth, and where you really feel like you're an extra mouth that needs to be fed. And so what's really extraordinary here is now you've went from having this person who was a senior who felt like they were a burden on their family to actually literally being the one supplying and feeding the family themselves. And that's created an immense amount of psychological benefit to the communities that we haven't quantified yet, but is greater than just the economic impact, which is sometimes how we have to think about these kinds of things and how to empower communities. So, you know, we have a sort of a more commercial setting for farming palm weevils in Ghana, and a facility that's on the grounds of the university. This is our older farm in Austin, Texas, that we farmed crickets in. We're actually in the process now and have finished constructing the first fully automated insect farm in North America. This is in Austin, Texas, and we modularized the entire technology so that you can actually set up a cricket farm anywhere in the world and produce a significant amount of protein to serve a large population. We're very fortunate to have received a lot of coverage. We were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal last week. These are our products. product. And actually, over there on the left is John Chambers. He's the former CEO of Cisco and their current executive chairman and an investor in Aspire. So it's really exciting to see that there's a lot of momentum this industry starting to see in terms of real interest in this as an alternative source of protein. So with that, I want to just say one thing to anybody in here who's an aspiring entrepreneur. Try not to learn on your own dime if you can afford to do that. And I know that might sound controversial, but here's what I mean. You know, the whole conventional wisdom that you should, I don't know, come up with an MVP in your garage and like on your credit card and all of that. Sure, if you have an idea you are immensely passionate about, that you've already identified in a product market fit and all of that, and you're in a position where you can take that kind of risk, go for it. But if you're like the vast majority of people, including myself, who haven't found their passion and are in this perpetual anxiety state of trying to figure out their passion while everybody around them tells them to figure out their passion, go and just take an opportunity that is of interest to you and take that experience to meet people and interact with people and learn ideas from them, and that's how your passion eventually will develop. And you may not ultimately find one singular thing that is your life calling. You may be the kind of person who loves to dabble in a specific problem for 5-10 year period in your life, then you move on to another challenge and another challenge. So remove this pressure from yourself that you have to have this singular cause around which your entire universe orbits, and start thinking more of it as, what's a really exciting, stimulating opportunity that I can find, and get in the door of entrepreneurship in the same way I did, which is I just worked at a startup that was well-funded, and so I didn't have to learn on my own dime, but on someone else's. And you know, when I was there, I started realizing that there were opportunities that eventually led me to something I've now become very passionate about. With that, I will conclude. I apologize if I went a couple of minutes over, and I'm happy to take any questions if there's time, but I doubt it.
Thank you so much. We'll now open it up to 1 or 2 questions.
Yes. Is there a lot of research on like bugs being healthy for you or like making you sick or that kind of thing?
Yes, there's a lot of published literature on the health benefits of consuming insects. I mean, it's a very high protein source of nutrition. And I mentioned already their feed conversion efficiency. So because we talked about cows having that 20 to 1, with crickets it's 1.7 to 1. So they literally are what they eat, which means you can actually feed them a high protein, high iron, high calcium diet, and that's exactly the output that you're going to get out of them.
Dr.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you're focusing on protein, but something more valuable that you can get from the same insect is a compound, chemical. Insects are chemical ecologists. They extract only one compound from their host material, only one. So many companies have tried to isolate compounds of pharmaceutical importance through analysis of insects. What plant compound is found in their body. So you might as well simultaneously start looking at another opportunity of wealth creation by looking at those compounds which they have very specifically isolated from their host plant, which can be used as pharmaceutical compound.
I think that's an excellent point, and we'll definitely keep that in mind as we continue our research and development, because that's a really exciting opportunity to kind of create new doors of revenue. All of you collectively. Yeah, so plan A was that we wanted to raise some donation money, so we went back to our school and said, hey guys, like, not to brush our shoulders off, but we kind of now are one of 5 global finalists. McGill is now going to New York, so can you guys hook us up, basically. And it wasn't that simplistic. Of course, we were wearing suits and we were a lot more elegant in our way of asking, but I think we made a very compelling case to the school that this is a really great exposure for the school itself and a great opportunity to invest. Our schools, constantly complain of not having money, but on the same time, they have a ton of money that they just don't know how to deploy well or haven't found the right outlet for. And so I think the onus was on us to create that and message that well. Plan B was we were actually going to fund it ourselves because, you know, we're not very high maintenance travelers. You know, the plane tickets were going to be expensive, but fortunately we didn't have to go there. We were very fortunate to be able to get a ton of support from our school, and we raised a significant amount of money that not only allowed us to travel, but actually allowed us to fund the pilot trials before we even got to New York.
That's all we have time for. Feel free to find him in the lobby to ask him any more questions, but thank you so much.